Namaste. Welcome everyone, and Losar Tashidile, if you're celebrating that. We have Kafle today at the end, so please stay for that. My name is Muna Gurung. I think I know most of you here. Thank you for being here. I write, I teach at the Open Institute for Social Science, and I also translate, and I run Kotha, which is this organization that supports storytelling and storytellers from Nepal. Thank you for being here today. We're very, very excited to launch this very special book today, How I Write. There's a massive cover behind us. And today is the auspicious day of the wood snake, I think, is the year of the wood snake. I'm also very much looking forward to sharing the stage with writers that I've looked up to for decades. Not to age them in any way, but that I have really looked up to, and also writers whom I read every day, and writers who I'm writing with every day. So it's a real privilege to share this space and this stage with them. And so, yeah, thank you, everyone. I'm gonna forget to thank folks later, and so I just want to do that right now. It takes a village, as they say. Even if this looks like a simple enough setup, I think there's a lot of folks that helped us. So first of all, Sonia Faleiro and Manjushree Thapa for trusting us with this book launch. Thank you so much. Thank you. Siddhartha Maharjan from Mandala Book Point and the folks at HarperCollins. Siddhartha is back there. Thank you for bringing the books into Nepal on time. It's often a struggle Nepalma kitabharu pauna ani time ma aunu. So thank you for that effort. And also for the past week or so, 2 weeks, Mandala Book Point has been giving away the kitab in like super sale prices. Thank you for that too. It's 20% off. Azapani, it's 900. So please get yourself a copy. If you're a teacher, get your students copies. If you have someone's birthday coming up, give them a copy. Really, please support this book, because we'll talk more about it but also the proceeds, 100% of the proceeds from this book, the sale of this book goes towards South Asia Speak Fellowship that supports writers from South Asia, the region. So please get yourself a few copies. Also wanted to thank my partner and our implementation partner, Shilpakar and Co. and Bhushan for sort of running for all of us. I didn't have to run that much. Thank you so much. Taragaon Next team for this space and for really welcoming us here. This is a beautiful amphitheater, and I'm so, I think this is the first time I've stood here for an event, and this is really special, so thank you for the space. We have to thank Rupak Raj, Sunwar, and Manish Podil, who's doing the photo and video documentation. These will be available online. If you really don't want your photo taken, just please let them know. We'll also make sure that we don't post that. Nati Maharjan and his team for sound, thank you so much for being here, and also the Sukul. And then the most important, sort of the backbone of this are our volunteers, Pooja Podil, Rojina Tamang, Sobnam Rai, Nobin Gewali, Smarika Fuyal, and Isabel Matthews. Thank you for running around, getting all the things set up. And then thank you to a special friend and writer, Niranjan Kaur, who was in India a couple of weeks back and got us a couple of books so that we could read them before the launch and have some reviews out. So thank you so much, Niranjan, for supporting us. Thank you. I think that's all my thank yous. And thank you all for being here. Okay, so without any further delay, I'm going to just invite our speakers and our writers on stage. So if Pooja, are you ready? Okay, so Pooja Podil, who is also a writer. She writes beautifully. She'll be, and Rodina Tamang will be welcoming our writers. Okay, first of all, I don't think that the Tulo introduction signs her. She's very dear to us, Manjushree Thapa. is the author of 8 books of literary fiction and nonfiction centered on social and political subjects in Nepal. She also translates Nepali language literature into English and is currently at work on several books, I hear. Up next, we have Roman Gautam. Thank you for being here, Roman. Roman is the editor of Himal South Asian, an independent regional magazine based in Colombo, and he was earlier senior editor at The Caravan in Delhi. Thank you. And truly, this is an international event. I mean, Manju's joining us from Toronto, and Roman just touched down like 40 minutes ago from India, so thank you for being here. And then we have Dinesh Kafle, who is an assistant professor at the School of the Arts, Kathmandu University. He translates between English and Nepali and writes a column in the Kathmandu Post. I'm sure you've read him there. Thank you so much. So we'll just stand up here and sort of hold up the book and officially launch it, and then just, yeah, I think Poila. Thank you. Okay. How I write. When I first saw the title of this book, I was reminded of, was it the 1946 essay from George Orwell called Why I Write? And it's something that I have read, and I also sometimes teach in class, followed by other writers like Joan Didion, who also wrote Why I Write. And then a couple of years ago, I was sitting with our Nepali writer Bhagirathi Shrestha, and she was showing me her old writings and photographs, and she had about 10, 15 handwritten pages of an essay that she had been writing called Mokina Liksu, Why I Write. And so that seems to be perhaps something that we all ask ourselves, and maybe to answer change pani huncha hola, haina? Harek barsha, harek mahina, I don't know. And in this book, there's a conversation here in which Pankaj Mishra says, all of us feel at some level the sense that we are powerless and that whatever we write has no power to change anything. But then at the same time, Meera Kamdar, in a conversation with Suketu Mehta quotes Salman Rushdie, who says, "A poem will not stop a bullet, a novel cannot diffuse a bomb, but writers can still sing truth and name the lies. We must work to overturn the false narratives of tyrants, populists, and fools by telling better stories than they do, stories within which people might actually want to live." So I thought maybe we could start there. I know this is about how I write, and we'll get to that part. But maybe I'd love to hear, maybe starting from Manju, and we can work our way towards our left. Yeah, like why is it that you write, or how did you come to it?
Can you hear me? Okay. Thanks for putting this program together. It's this is a really cheerful book because I think Roman was saying earlier, like we don't feel like we own it. It's 30 writers talking about how they write. So the one thing that I found reading it because I was very interested as a writer, because I know how I write, but it's always you want to know how other people are doing this. So to me it was of great interest, but also the issue of why are these people writing what they're writing. And that, how I write seemed to be almost 30 different answers from 30 different people, whereas why I write seemed like only a few motivations. And I think my motivation is very similar to many of the writers' motivations. I'm going to quote Parul Sehgal, which is a beautiful segment of this. I mean, I love her writing so much. I will read everything she writes. But she basically says, in fiction, when you write fiction, the author is creating a world into which the reader is also invited or allowed in. But you're not creating that world for the reader. Whereas when you're doing nonfiction, you are much more aware of your reader, your audience, and it's a little bit more performative. You want to make sure that you grab their attention, keep their attention, always sort of hold on to that. So it's a different relationship with the audience. I think my basic motivation was the first one, which is to create a world that explained the external world to me, because my impulse is quite documentary. I'm not writing science fiction, I'm not writing fantasy, I'm writing very sort of social, socially realistic in a way, literature. So my motivation is to create a world that explains the confusions of the world, and the reader is invited into that. That's what I thought.
Thank you.
Testing. Oh. Yeah, I also just want to start by saying thank you, Muna, and thank you to everybody that Muna said thank you to. It's such a pleasure. Yeah, there's so many ways to answer that. Like Manju, you were saying, I mean, it's so different for each writer. And I should say also, I mean, I don't think of myself as a writer. It's not that I've never written, but I think that, what I do day to day and what I love doing is working as an editor. And does that make me a writer? Yes or no? I mean, anyway, that's a complicated thing. I firmly believe that writing is rewriting, and rewriting is editing, and hence writing is editing, and editing is writing. But that's a different conversation. I think, there's, and I've edited fiction before. I think most of what I do is edit nonfiction, but also, edit nonfiction for style and for effect and for power, for clarity. And I think there's a lot to be said in doing that. And I think that there's a certain distillation of truth, perhaps, that writing demands. And I think that that's something that is lacking in the world generally. And it's not just our age, as much as we like to complain about how social media has changed things. So I think there's a lot to be said about that. But those are all kind of maybe the broader philosophical answers. I think that on a very personal level, why do I edit in my case? I think it does go back to something that, Manjushree, what you were just closing with, right? I mean, for me, I think there's a tendency to think of writing as a very solitary pursuit, and yes, it can be. And I'm sure that everyone here who's tried to put coherent words down on paper knows that deep loneliness and solitude. I mean, sometimes it's disturbing, sometimes it's a comfort. But I think that I just really think that writing is actually a very collaborative thing. And it begins when you start working with an editor. And for me, the biggest pleasure and the reason I do this is just the sheer joy of doing things together. And I think on that front, actually, maybe social media has changed things. I think that, the way that we're living now, I think that we're forgetting that, right? We're forgetting that not just in the literary realm, we're forgetting that pleasure in many, many, many realms. And for me, editing and what we get to do is very much work together with a writer, and that's a huge privilege and a pleasure, and which it is a seed of community. And I think Manjushree was saying you're inviting people into the world, or into a world, into many worlds. And again, social media, right? It's something we all do, we all share. Yet it makes us feel very deeply alone, evidently, in ways that writing and reading never did. It's strange because I mean, I think like so many of you, I was the kid who was happiest in a corner with a book, right? And you would imagine that that is a very isolating and lonely experience. It never was. Because actually you're joining a community of the mind of these worlds and also of writers and thinkers. It's actually a way to open up so many conversations. And I think that, again, the joy of doing things together, meaning the joy of bringing that together and then having all of those people, for me, that's why I do it, basically.
Thank you, Monazi, and thank you everyone for joining in. And I thank the South Asia Speaks for choosing me as one of their fellows. I guess I was the first Nepali to join them as a fellow, and I hope that many more Nepalis will join in in the next few years. And so when I think about writing, I think I'm doing a bit of what Manjushree is doing, what Romanji is doing. I worked at the Kathmandu Post for 5 years. I edited the opinion page there. So I did a lot of editing, which means rewriting. And I also do some non-fiction writing, basically journalistic writing. And I also do a bit of translation. So there are different reasons why I do all of these things. When I do non-fiction writing, basically journalistic reporting, I do not do the everyday reporting that my friends do, the hard news reporting. I don't do that. So I write features, a bit of long form. And when I do that, I'm interested in the long form because it gives you that pleasure of writing. Even if there aren't many publications here that publish long form, it's the sheer pleasure of writing, the creative aspect that draws you there. But also, when I write, I write a bit more of opinion these days. And when I do that, I do it with a certain sense of responsibility towards the society. I think like a teacher when I do that, because also perhaps because I'm a teacher and I do a lot of explaining what this society is, what's happening, the social media thing that Romanji is talking about. Every day in the class, I'm basically bashing social media for what it's doing. So I feel like explaining things to my fellow countrymen, right? So I write for the Kathmandu Post. So I think with a very local perspective. So I basically write to explain things to people, and there we can actually bring in George Orwell, who says he writes with the historical. One of the impulses of the 4 major impulses is the historical impulse, right? You want to record things for the future so that others who come later on, they understand what the society was. And also there's some kind of a political impulse of trying to change things. But recently somebody was telling me that, like, I also write about Indian politics because I stayed in India. I think that I understand a little bit of Indian politics. And somebody, my professor in the university was telling me, you have been bashing Modi for such a long time and nothing is happening now. I think you should stop writing bashing Modi altogether. But obviously we do not always expect things to change, but even though there's some hope that things will change, right? But at least the hope is that when we write with political impulses, we hope that there will be some activists who will read our pieces and learn a bit and try to take the lead, practical action, right? Rather than just do some discursive work that we do in the newspaper or in the classroom. So there are different impulses that drive me to write.
Mona, because you're a writer too, are you going to answer the question too?
Yeah, I think it changes for me too. I think I started writing because my parents don't. I think it was a very personal thing for me. And I felt that, like many writers in this book too, like there's a lot of that, I didn't see myself in the books that I read kind of narrative. When I was growing up in both Singapore and Kathmandu, like in Kathmandu, I started reading a lot of South Asian writers. British Council ko त्यतिखेर library there, so you could go and sort of check out books. And I remember being gravitated towards the South Asian writers because I felt like there was something familiar there, and I think I was looking for something familiar. School ma chai, it turns out Roman and I went to the same school. School ma chai, literature ma, we had like, what do we have? Emily Dickinson, Shakespeare, and you know, all the canon. And I think in the South Asian writers was where I found that literary home, or like that feeling like, oh, like यस्तो पनि characters हुँदो रहेछ हैन. अनि त्यो भइसकेपछि चाहिँ then I think I kept looking, and that's why I think when your book came out, it was like the fact that you wrote and the fact that the book was out, like I think I could imagine myself as a writer, you know, and I think that was so important. So for me, I think I write mostly for my parents in some ways, because I feel like they don't write, and I want to tell some of these stories. So yeah, I don't know if that answers, but it sort of changes for me. Oh, yeah. Maybe we can get into the book then a little bit, because from what I understand, this was a series of master classes, yes, and maybe Dinesh and Manju and Roman can speak more about it. So it's 30 writers, 18 conversations, and they're really lovely conversations. I'm not saying this just so you'd buy the book, but really, and it's a very quick sort of like, I sat down and in like a day and a half, I was done reading it because they were so engaging. And then a lot of it is very generous and also very, some of them being very vulnerable and very open. And so it's master classes that is now then in the form of a book. And the other day we were joking that this is like, and I mean, not joking, but this is like an MFA in a book, MFA in writing in a book. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about sort of the making of this book, and maybe even parts. I know that so Manju and Roman have a conversation in the book. It's really lovely, and I'll read some parts of it in a bit. But yeah, maybe you could share about how this conversation in this book came to be. But because it seems like a public event, was it, or a class, or?
So, I mean, I think credit where credit is due. I think Sonia Faleiro, I think, this is very much her brainchild. I think the book, but also the South Asia Speaks Fellowship. And the fellowship itself, I think, important to understand for context on how this came together. The fellowship is basically writers, and I think I'm the solitary editor from across South Asia. Or I should say from across South Asian backgrounds as well, because not everyone is based in the subcontinent. Coming together to really give the next generation, in most cases, what they wish they had had themselves and never had. Mentorship and guidance and advice and editing, period. But also all those things from people who understand a little bit more of where they're coming from and what they're trying to say. Because the industry in the English language, of course, is very much dominated. I mean, I think this is changing for the better now, slowly. But I think certainly an earlier generation of writers felt the lack of people who understood what they were trying to say in deeper terms, perhaps. And so that's the fellowship. And Sonia was very kind to ask me if I wanted to be a part of it. I immediately said yes. It's such a pleasure to work with young writers this way. And as part of that, she said, I think for each of the mentors, she asked them to invite a writer to do a conversation. And a conversation, but again, a conversation about craft and writing and how you think about writing, how you think about making yourself a writer, all of these things. And when she asked me who I would want to speak to, Manjushree, Manju, you were the first name. I think you have such a depth of experience that I think for any young writer, experience teaches you a lot and counts for a lot. And I think that for all those young writers there, I remember having a few interactions with them afterwards as well. I think that's really what they valued, that you brought such a wide perspective to it, because here were people who were just staring up the mountain, and I don't know if anyone ever reaches the top of the mountain, but you were certainly higher up the mountain than they were.
The interesting, what I didn't know when I read the introduction and I found out, is that this is Sonia Faleiro's pandemic project. So many of us spent the pandemic, making tofu or doing other things. She decided to start South Asia Speaks. So it's quite a resource. I know Dinesh has been a fellow. You've been a mentor. This year I'm going to be a mentor, and it's really with the book too. I mean, the book is basically the conversations that come out of the mentorship process, I think, and it's just like it is an MFA. It is, and its value is that it's South Asian, because there is such a difference to starting out as a writer in this part of the world and in the West. It is totally different, and in a way this is a much more creative and open space in which to write. So I think the book is such a valuable resource because it can now reach a lot of young writers who have many open pathways, many options ahead of them, and it will help them navigate their way forward.
Hello. I wanted to talk a little bit then about the conversation that you two have, and I think, Manju, you started with fiction, but obviously you've written so much nonfiction, and also you're a translate, right? And I remember as a grad student, I had written to Manjushree. I don't know if you remember, but I was in grad school, and I think I was doing some research on Nepalese writing in English, and I was like, I have to write to Manjushree Thapa. So I think I found your email somewhere, and then I spent a week crafting those 5 sentences I was going to write to you, and then you replied a day later. And I was shocked, and I was so excited, and I was like, wow, she replied to my email. I really thought it was going to be lost, but I mean, that's been the kind of generosity that you've always offered, I feel, to me and others that I've spoken to, in terms of sort of mentorship, and also in terms of sort of pushing me, I think personally, me towards translation, actually. And now translation is suddenly hip. Right, there are folks winning Nobel Prizes, and now everyone wants to sort of get on the translation bandwagon, I think, a little bit. But you were doing it when it was still uncool, and you sort of encouraged me to do that. And actually today we have Sulochana ji, who's in the audience with us, who's a poet, and Manju introduced me to Sulochana ji to translate some of her poems for Words Without Borders, which then turned into a book that Tilted Access Press in the UK published, and now Tilted Access Press is blown up, and now, so translation is really, really catching on. And what I found very striking and interesting in the conversation that you have with Roman, you say, and I'll read this, for me it was really productive, creatively, to be reading my elders and peers in the Nepali language, even though I was writing in English, because that gave me a sense of the intellectual milieu I was coming out of, and the intellectual milieu that my characters or their nation were inhabiting. Beginning to translate these writers became absolutely central as a way to resolve issues in my own writing. And then later on, you say this line, which I wanted you to speak more about. You say, it was absolutely grounding for me to understand that I was, as an English writer, not writing in a void. I had all of these peers in Nepal's 120 plus languages. There was this big literary dialogue going on, and Nepal, like any place in Asia, has a hectic literary scene. There are a lot of books coming out, a lot of book reviews, a lot of dialogue around books. It was very humbling, it was grounding, and it certainly made me realize that writing in English doesn't make you a better writer. Often, it makes you a worse writer about your country or society. Say more.
Okay, so I'm going to ground everything I say in the words of other writers that I read in this book. And I cannot remember which writer said this, but it was a really brilliant point, which is if you're a South Asian writer, you have two options. One is you go towards the diaspora and you write about diaspora topics, or you go towards your own society and you go deeper into your society. So when I was a young writer, I honestly, I didn't know. I had, the people I was reading were obviously, Salman Rushdie or Vikram Seth, or of that generation of Indian writers writing in English who were global. It was Amitav Ghosh. And so I was younger than them, and I was just forming when they were being published and getting all of the recognition they were getting. So I knew that I didn't, and I lived in Nepal, and I knew I wanted to go inside Nepali society. So I knew I wasn't interested in diaspora stories. So for example, someone like Jhumpa Lahiri was a writer who I find very elegant and very beautiful, but I had absolutely no interest in doing that kind of writing. So then, once I knew, and that is very much part of the how I write, is first identifying what kind of writer do I want to be. What do I want to write? What is my genre? What is my style? What is my voice? Like, who do I admire as writers? So then once I identified that this was what I wanted to be, it came as, because I'm very embarrassed by how little connection I had with Nepali society. When I began to write, my schooling was entirely in the United States. And of course I knew there's a lot of Nepali writers here and there's a big literary scene, but I couldn't read Nepali, and so I just had no into it, and I also assumed that it was very traditional, I just had this sort of paternalistic sense or sort of elite sense of, oh, well, who knows what they're saying. So I'm really grateful to, actually it was the poet Manjul, who basically told me to translate and sat down with me, and we translated many things. We translated Garcia Lorca's poems from the English, so not from the Spanish, but from the English translation into Nepali. Then I started to translate a lot of, he taught me how to read. And then I started to read very intensively and started to translate Nepali literature. And that, it was such a gift. It made me, so I honestly my sense of what and now I'm living in Toronto. I'm still not interested in diaspora stories. I'm still writing about here because that is absolutely when I was formed as a writer, was in my 20s. I was reading all of this Nepali literature and really just full of admiration for the kinds of works that my elders and my peers had written. So yeah, it was very humbling, and I think that's really important because English writers can get so much more attention than Nepali writers, just because there are so few, like we're so much fewer, and we have more access to Kathmandu's media. So I think it's really important to stay humble about that. Yeah.
Dinesh, maybe to speak also, because you also move between two languages. And then maybe Roman also, I think last year Himal South Asian had was it last year? Like the translation? Anyway, from the region maybe.
And the question about moving between the two languages. It's sometimes difficult. I write, I don't only translate between English and Nepali and English. I also write in English and Nepali both. I've not been doing much Nepali writing these days, but it's confusing. There's the lobe of the readers, because there are many more readers in Nepali when you write in Nepali publications, right? So you write the same content in Kantipur, you have like 10,000 readers, and then you write for the Kathmandu Post and you don't get like more than 2 comments, right? But then since I write about contemporary issues, I get a lot of galis, and that's how I know that people are at least reading, at least like on social media, you get to know that people are reading. But it's quite difficult to decide first which language you want to use. But nowadays, because I worked in the Kathmandu Post for so long, now I'm more used to writing in English, and also my columns are in English. So I'm not doing much Nepali writing these days. But yeah, it's difficult to navigate. But what I was interested in was what Manjushree was talking about how Nepali reading informed her English writing, and also how actually her English writing in English about Nepali society became much more enhanced while she translated also from Nepali to English, right? Could you also like I would be more interested to hear about that. You also wrote a manual actually of translating from English to Nepali. I read that like more than 15 years ago, and that's actually was a really good manual in those days. I remember reading it and learning from it actually, and so thank you for that. Actually, it was very formative in those days.
Just answer you quickly. The translation manual was a collaboration. Himal Books, Basanta Thapa had put together a translation workshop, and we had invited some of the best writers of Nepal to be part of that, to sort of encourage them to start translating work. And we had so much fun at that workshop. It was like a 2-day workshop. And we were just doing, all trying in teams to translate things. And then that manual came out of that, out of a huge discussion with really like the best writers of Nepal about actually how would you translate this into Nepali. And it's out of print, unfortunately, but I still think it's a really valuable document. So it wasn't me, but it was a big collaboration. My master's thesis was in creative writing, was about how the act of translation is exactly the equivalent of the act of writing about a non-English society in English. So for me, I studied a lot of the presence of South Asian languages in the works of someone like Salman Rushdie. It's very obvious because he plays with language so actively. But also other writers, do you use the sentence structure is more South Asian or is more sort of Germanic backwards, from English? Or how does the language of the subject imprint itself on the text? So that was like my main subject of my master's thesis. So yeah, I feel like writing about translating it gave me absolutely like so many insights into how to write about the Nepali mind, the Nepali mindset, the Nepali thought patterns, processes, cultures, belief systems of my subjects. Really important, I thought.
I want to add a bit about the language part. In my English writing these days, there's a lot of Nepali infused, because Kathmandu Post also allows me to use those Nepali terms. So there's a lot of words like tamasa when I write about politics. So I infuse a lot of Nepali masala in there, and that has worked for me at least, and for a small audience that interact with me, that seems to have worked well. When I wrote the editorials there, readers, because obviously the writer's name is not there in the editorials, but regular readers would know that this was written by me. So I have developed a certain sense of style in English writing also by infusing a lot of Nepali. When I was doing this fellowship, my translator said a very interesting thing. He said that there's a lot of my Nepali influence in my English translation also, which is not necessarily a great thing always. Because English has its own style, right? It has its own cadences. And if you make it so Nepali heavy, then the English readers might not understand it. So I like, because I also, when I speak Nepali, I speak with a certain dialect. I come from the western part of Nepal, so I speak with a certain dialect in Nepali also, and that reflects in my Nepali writing. That also somehow reflects in my English writing also. I speak with a certain Nepali style of pronunciation, right? So all of that actually basically comes in my English writing also. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, because I write only in the South Asian context. I wrote in the Indian newspapers earlier, and that worked. I used a lot of, because I speak Hindi, I infused a lot of my Hindi words, right? So that has worked for me in this very small context. But Romanji, he basically handles all of South Asia. He would be able to tell more about whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, right? because South Asia, right? So they have to be inclusive. So do you actually encourage that to use local language?
I mean, who am I or who the hell is anyone to say what's good or bad that way, right? I think that what I love about this conversation right now is how we're making a complete mess of all the old categories, and I think that's how it should be, right? I think there's a tendency to assume that, it's either this or that, either Nepali or English. But these categories don't make sense anymore, right? I mean, even when you're talking about a Nepali writer, usually we will assume, is writing in Nepali. But the tradition that they're coming from and that they're drawing on, those national categories, the way that, it was French literature, because you could only go to a French library and read the old French guys, right? Look at the internet, look at what we're reading, right? I mean, there's a joke in Kerala that the biggest Malayalam writer of all time is Gabriel Garcia Marquez, because his translations are everywhere, everyone reads them, everyone loves them. They think that he is part of their world. There's something about him that speaks to them. Here, there are Russian writers that pretty much every Nepali writer has read. Chekhov, I mean, so many of them, right? So this national kind of categorization is already super messy. On top of that, and this goes back, Muna, to what you were saying about suddenly translation is cool, because I think that in the English language, we hit a lot of dead ends, right? And I shouldn't say we, because I think that it's really the world that only speaks English that hit those dead ends. And suddenly they started to wake up to the fact that there's other stuff going on as well, right? And I think in English, we had been carpet bombed, and I use that term very carefully, right? It comes with a certain colonial baggage, and the language comes with a certain colonial baggage, right? We had been just hit with the same old narratives and same old stories and told that this is all you could do. And then people, writers, very often writers lead the way, start to break out of those boxes. And that's, I think, what's happening. And with the English language, none of us made a choice that way to speak English, right? This was a world that we were born into. You make the best of what you're given. It is, for better or worse, the one language that can connect us more than any other single language in the subcontinent. And it's very strange, right? It's still a minority language in a very real sense. Yet here we are, and so we have to make the best we can. We can do the best we can with it. And in terms of bringing in those kinds of influences, this is why I love fiction. For instance, I think that when you're writing journalism, sure, when you have a column and you have much more of your voice, there's much more room to play. I think that sometimes in more news, or let's say factual writing, whatever you want to call it, there's less room to play. But in fiction, the language is your playground, and nobody can tell you what's wrong or what's right. I mean, there's so many jokes that open up when you take two languages and cross them together. I mean, Salman Rushdie's famous, he has a famous character, or famous to me at least, whose name is Whiskey Sisodia. You can't translate that to somebody who doesn't get it, right? I mean, and there's so many things like that. You infuse Hindi, Bhojpuri, Nepali, Newari, who cares, right? I mean, if it's you and it's what you're coming from and it shows the lines that you are crossing, the most interesting fiction right now is happening where those lines are being crossed, I think. So, yeah.
Hello. I'm sort of also thinking about my students too. Sometimes I feel like they're still doing the translation into English. So for instance, I don't know, I can't come up with something, but using a Nepali word and then in brackets writing it in English, versus what you're saying, Roman, is just like being acrobatic with all of these different languages, right? And and I guess that's also this thing about audience, हैन? कसको लागि लेखिरहेको, हैन? So even we have a joke in class. We say you don't have to start your essay by saying Nepal is a country between Tibet and India. Like, you don't have to say that. Like, it's okay. We can start, wherever you want to start, where the action is happening. So त्यो भूमिका बाँधिरहनु पर्दैन भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ हामीले गर्छौं, हैन? So anyway, I was just reminded. Also, I mean, it's about audience. And I wanted to get a little bit into, I guess this could also be about audience, but it's also about feedback taking and giving that we were sort of talking about earlier. in one of the conversations with Mira Nair, Nair, the filmmaker, she says, "What is missing from us is rigor. The first draft should not be," and she cusses, "published. It is about pushing yourself, sharpening your skills. We call it spitting and shining. You have to keep doing that and subject yourself to opinions. Be receptive, don't be high-handed." So when I told my mom that there was a book launch today, she thought it was my book launch. And she was like, "Oh yeah, you have been in your room writing." So I thought, "Oh, you finished your book yesterday, and so today you are launching it." And I was like, no. But at the same time, I mean, I know we're laughing now, but that does happen too, where folks sort of write and then like just publish, right? So I wonder if I know that Manju, you've been working with a longtime editor of yours, and Roman, you're editing, and Dinesh too is like teaching, but also as an editor. Could we talk about that writer-editor relationship, perhaps, and that process of the going back and forth, like, you know, how much of that happens, how much, I don't know, of that should happen. I don't know if you want to say should or must, but yeah, like what do we think of this feedback thing when, feedback culture, when still, ajasamma pani in Nepali, we still think of the Asu Kavi, no? Like the spontaneous poet, the genius who can just write, you know? I mean, I've read in papers like there's ink in my blood, that idea of, you know, that you're born with it. So, yeah, could maybe we talk about that a little bit too?
As you were talking, I was remembering Martin Chaudhary once organized a writing residency for writers, and the first year we did it, Kunikamata, we found funds and we did it. And so we had a lot of writers, and it was really, again, really exciting program, because as a writer, I always feel that I don't have enough time to write. I cannot afford time to write. I have to do so many other things. I have to make money. I have to do this. There are so many other claims on my time that all I really want is a place where food will come. I don't have to cook it, and I can just sit and write all day. So we had organized this. And the first time we did it, I think it was 2 months. And it was just too much time for Nepali writers. It was like there was nothing they could spend 2 months writing. It was such an interesting experience. So many of them finished their projects in 2-3 weeks, and they were like, "Do I have to keep staying on? Can I leave? So I think we're coming from a tradition where the first draft is the book. And sometimes I know that writers now do give the draft to some trusted readers to read, or to an editor to read, and maybe will make a few adjustments. But it is nowhere near the kind of process. So in this book, you have Kamila Shamsi writes about it. Sugi Ganeshanathan writes about, she took 18 years to write her novel that just won the Women's book prize, and you know, is a beautiful novel. And her chapter is titled, "I Can Take As Much Time As I Want," which was very exciting for me, because I'm going on the 7th year of working on a novel. So the tradition that I come out of, which is the English writing tradition, and you know, I was educated in the US, assumes that the first draft is going to be rubbish. It assumes that you're going to refine and refine and refine, and you're going to work, especially as if you're going to be a published writer, you're going to work with editors. So working with an editor is something you seek out, and you want someone who can see things that you're not seeing. So I was really lucky as a young writer to run into Ravi Singh, who has been the editor of almost all of my books, not all, but almost all of my books. And particularly I felt like we grew up together, because he was a young editor, I was a young writer, and it was just such a good editing experience where he always saw things I just was not seeing, even though I felt I had done absolutely everything on the text, and always enlarged my view. So it's something I really seek out, but I know it's really painful, and I know it can feel really personal, and it can feel like a personal failure if someone points out something that's not working. But I think those are just two different traditions, maybe. I don't know. What's your, Roman, you work with a lot of...
I think there is a question of tradition in this, and I think that the tradition of editing and also, but I think even the writers who publish the first draft, they never do it in isolation. I think that, at least conversations, there's a lot of editing that happens in the mind, perhaps. But I think you're absolutely right that, how to put this? I think this is perhaps, in my experience, the biggest hurdle to people writing books. This is a misconception that I certainly grew up under, and I'm constantly surprised that even writers who sometimes have done a lot of work on, not books but other projects, there's this misconception that the books that you love, the books that you hold up as your touchstones, that somebody just sat there for 6 years thinking about it nonstop, and then one day sat down at the computer or paper and quill, whatever it is, and just wrote every single word in sequence from page 1 to page 677. And that's it. It was perfect. It came out perfectly that way. It never works that way. It doesn't work that way for long nonfiction, for anything in long form. That's simply not how it works. And even, people talk about writer's block. I think oftentimes writer's block is writers who know that this is the process, but still are expecting that at some point that moment of perfect inspiration will arrive, where you will be able to go from word 1 to word 1 million, whatever. It never comes, right? And for me, when I was a kid and reading books, that's honestly how I thought it worked. And it took a while to be kind of deprogrammed. And I think that, especially for young writers here, if any of you are under the same impression, then that's not how it works. You start out by putting whatever it is down on paper, and then you take it to somebody to edit. You can take it to your friends. Oftentimes, you just put the thing aside for 6 months and come back to it with a fresh mind, because that perspective in itself will let you see things differently. And the process is that. It's asking somebody else, sometimes it's a different person in your own head, to take a second look at it and see what it needs. What is it missing? What do you think of it now compared to what you thought of it before? I started out by saying writing is rewriting. I think that's the only, some writers have these little slogans kind of printed above their desks. That's the one I had above mine for 2 years, at which point I thought it was silly and I took it down. But I think there's truth to that, and I think that it's very important to understand that. It's never, and whether you're writing plays or whatever else, whether you're writing a piece of music, right? Composition as well. It is composition, and composition is work. Composition is, yes, you can come up with an inspiring idea. The seed of it can come to you out of the blue. A certain passage might come to you out of the blue. I know that poetry works differently, where certain times poems come out perfectly formed. But I doubt that Munamodan came out perfectly formed that way, right? I'm sure that Allah milaunलाई सबै गर्नलाई यताउति काटकुट गर्नै पर्ने हुन्छ त्यस्तो कुरामा पनि.
तपाईँको चाहिँ, what are your students like? Because sometimes and some of them are here in the audience, will say, I worked on this, I worked so hard for 5 hours. And I'm like, cool, that's great, keep going, right? But sometimes 5 hours, it feels a lot when you don't write, that much, right? It can feel precious, and I think I forget who was talking about writing being precious. I've always sort of believed that, like, the more you write, the less precious your writing is, and the easier it is to sort of let go, right? But then I've worked on something for 5 hours, or I've worked on something for a week, so it should be perfect. Why is it not? Like, I always struggle with my students too. I'm curious, uta media students.
Especially for young writers, this is a problem. My student, there's always this tussle. There was one time when a student told me that that writing was this person's life, and then I killed it because I edited it, right? In the classroom, it was an assignment. So that happens a lot. And even these days when I teach my students, when I'm in the classroom, I always encourage them to read it out in front of the class. I ask others to respond to them. And a lot of them actually don't respond to those writings because they know that their friends will mind. रिसाउँछ किन भनिदिनु होइन, ठिकै छ, राम्रो भयो. Like, I liked it. That's the most common comment, and that doesn't work, right? So yeah, for young writers, it's really difficult to convince them that their first draft is not the last. Like you have to continue rewriting, right? I was reading Diksha Basu's interview here, and she says that she basically chopped off 90,000 words of her manuscript because it was not working, right? Kamila Shamsi says she chopped off 30,000 words of her writing. Suketu Mehta wrote 1,600 pages of maximum CT, the first draft, right? And it came down to 600 pages, right? So experienced writers don't mind. It's the same thing with the Kathmandu Post. There are these young writers who do not like at all that I edit. And it's really difficult to find editors who edit actually in the newspapers because there aren't many editors here. Most of the editing that happens here in our newspapers is just proofreading, not editing actually. And so even when writers find editors who do the actual editing, they don't like it because they are not used to being commented upon. They are not used to being said that timro writing ramro chaina, so in general also, I think in Nepal we are too nice to each other, and so we don't say bad things about their writing, at least in front of them. पछाडि गएर चाहिँ भनिन्छ त्यो पछाडि भन्ने कुरा खास अगाडि भनिदियो भने that would be actually better, but त्यो culture हाम्रोमा नभएको भएर. So in the post also I used to have a lot of issues with especially with young writers. एउटा चाहिँ अलि established writers, especially if there's a neta who has written a 2,000 word piece and doesn't want to cut down, right? यो मैले लेखेको मैले भन्नै पर्ने छ, जनतालाई बुझाउनै पर्ने छ यति कुरा, हैन? हो त्यो चाहिँ एकदमै डिफिकल्ट हुन्छ. समटाइम्स त्यो पावर लगाएर आउँछ, दे गो एन्ड टक टु द पब्लिसर्स एन्ड से तिम्रो मान्छेले मेरो छापिदिरहेको छैन, इट्स जस्ट 2,000 वर्ड्स, अरूको आर्टिकल हटाएर मेरो छापिदिनु न, दोज काइन्ड्स अफ इस्युज. बट हामी चाहिँ त्यो छोड्दैनौँ. If the 1,200 word is the maximum, then we don't go beyond that, हैन? So we have a lot of tussle, and त्यसको problem चाहिँ के हो भने writers just don't want to have their work edited. त्यो चाहिँ हाम्रोमा एकदमै problem छ.
My point of view, and I know that with so many young writers, I mean, people that I've taught, edited, yes, that's a huge point of friction oftentimes. I think that it has to be said and said over and over again, I think, to so many young writers that's the best thing you can possibly get, right? Because that is the very act of editing. I think that for me, the first time anyone edited me was when my teachers were ripping my essays to pieces, right? I still remember getting, I think I wrote something like 900 words and I probably got 2,000 words from my teacher telling me everything that it was doing wrong. That was editing. And the fact that everything comes up marked up in red means that somebody took 4 hours, 8 hours, 20 hours to think about every single thing. That is a huge compliment, because if your writing was actually bad, why the hell would I even take the trouble, right? That's the fundamental of it. Somebody was interested enough to read it not once, but to read it 6 times. Think about the potential that piece has, right? I think that flipping that, sometimes with young writers, I find that flipping it that way, they suddenly start to understand that it's because it's worth it. What you're doing is worth it. That's why somebody took the trouble and put in the time to actually go over every word, to ask the right questions, to point out where you could do something more.
Can I just jump in with that? I don't know if I agree fully. And I think it's because you killed my life because I wanted to be a writer and you just marked it up. I think I mean, it happens because I remember learning Nepali. I was 12 years old. It truly felt like it killed my love for this language that I could have maybe had a relationship with. So I wonder if it's also like koile feedback kosto dine, कसरी दिने, हैन? अनि कसरी लिने पनि, and it's not just about I don't know, marking it up maybe.
There was one time when in the post when I gave a lot of feedback to one young writer's writing, उसलाई एकदमै टाइम पनि लाग्यो. I also spent a lot of time on it, जसरी उहाँले भन्नुभयो, हैन? And the final comment कसैबाट चाहिँ मैले थाहा पाएको चाहिँ the one word that this writer used about me was एकदमै कचकचे रहेछ हैन, because I made them rewrite it a lot of times, right? But finally the piece was really good ultimately, हैन. अनि I was happy that the piece was good. The comments, because I was so used to getting those kinds of comments from the writers that at one point त्यो mind गर्न पनि छोडिन्छ हैन. So I don't mind that I kill somebody's darlings or life or whatever. I don't stop editing. And this also I got from I don't know if Pranay is here, but whenever I write something long, let's say a long form piece or something, especially if it's a fellowship or something, because they have some money for editors also, right? So I make sure that Pranay is the editor for me, because he does a lot of editing, a lot of comment and feedback, back and forth and all that. He actually invests a lot of his time in your writing, and that's really rewarding for you. So I make sure that I have a really good editor when I do a slightly longer project. So once you get used to having a good editor, you actually know how much of an impact it has on your writing. So you get used to working with the editors, right? But let's say in a newspaper, it doesn't work like that, because you don't have the time, right? You have a very short turnaround time. You have to publish every day. You have a deadline, right? So you cannot wait for your writer also to revise and send it back. So a lot of times you just do the editing and then publish it, right? And that's where the readers are like, मैले भएको भए त एडिट गर्थिनँ, बरु विथड्र गर्थेँ, things like that. So there's a lot of tussle that happens daily. I don't know, तपाईँको चाहिँ अलिकति बढी टाइम पाउनुहुन्छ है?
त्यस्तो पनि हुन्छ. And Muna, I think to answer your question, I mean, and that's a different panel, and I don't think a panel that I belong on, but I think there's a big conversation to be had about pedagogical style, हैन. भन्नाले के सिकाएको मात्र हैन, कसरी सिकाएको पनि एकदम ठुलो प्रश्न. अनि अब नेपाली अब विद्यालयहरुमा चाहिँ पढाइ अब लेख्ने चाहिँ काम के गरी सिकाइन्छ? हामीलाई नेपाली भाषामा सिकाएको तरिका घोकेर दोहोर्याउनु. नेपाली साहित्यको चम्किलो आकाशमा के थियो हैन, त्यस्तै घोकेर सबले एसएलसीमा यही लेख्नु पर्छ भनेर हामी सबलाई अब फर्मुला नै सिकाएको थियो. That's math, है, that's not writing. So there's a lot to be said on it. त्यहाँबाट, yeah, then how do you respond to somebody taking the time to critique? You get very defensive, I know. So I think there's a bigger conversation this, man.
I mean, we talked a little bit about young writers, and I'm feeling a bit protective about them right now. Because I think there's one of the problems with writing, and particularly I would say fiction writing, is that it's so romanticized. And so there's such this romantic image of how you get hit by inspiration and you write this stuff and it's genius. And then it gets, you know, all the prizes and then you earn a lot of money. So the one great thing, oh yeah, as you can tell. The one great thing about this book is that it really shows you, so I made little notes and I'm just going to run through them very fast. The many stages that people have to go through to become one of the writers in this book, which is like you begin with that question of like, what kind of writer do I want to be? You begin with the ground you're standing on. What are the resources I have? What is the education I have? What are my opportunities? What are the newspaper? What are the publications that will publish me? You know, you start there. You figure out what form do I want. Do you want fiction, narrative, nonfiction, criticism, theater, screenplay, journalism, comedy, you know, poetry, translation, like all of these, and science fiction, like there's a lot of things. So you start there, and then you go on to the second thing, which is both finding your thematics, the why, what is the story that's important enough for me to tell, that I care about enough telling, and how am I going to tell this? What is the style? What are my aesthetics? And that is like the meat and bones of turning into a writer. And this is where you turn to editors and you turn to other writers and have feedback from writers that you respect. And you may only take 10% of what they say, but you take it and you learn from it and you grow from it. And then after that, you know, comes the craft, which is also like, you know, the drafts, the revisions, the mentors. Pankaj Mishra has a really lovely line about how you have to outgrow your mentors. So, you know, very early on in my life, I wanted to write like Don DeLillo. And, you know, and that's what I always aimed for. And at some point, I realized I really am not writing a Don DeLillo novel. And so you let go of that and find the influences, the literary traditions, influences that really matter to you. And then you finally get to the career stage, when you're, and that's not even a fully formed writer, that's a beginning writer. So then you start, like, how do you send the proposal? How do you find an agent? How do you contact these publishing houses? South Asia, it's a lot more approachable because we can just, find people like in our own circles and kind of move towards publishing houses. But it's very difficult outside. The access is not there. And then you have the attendant question is, how do I make money? And how do I support myself? How do I support my writing? Is my writing going to support me, or am I going to support my writing? Which I will tell you, the majority of writers here have other jobs and other ways of supporting their writing. And then there's research, and and then there was, I forget again which writer it was who talked about developing like a later maturity as a writer, which is, I feel like I did that maybe like 4 or 5 books in. I feel like I kind of hit my stride, and the early books are all sort of me flailing, looking for what kind of writer I was. So it's a very long process, and there's not a lot of glamour in it. And I feel I never want to discourage a young writer who wants to write, but I also do want them to have a realistic sense of how much work it is. And you do it because you want to do it, and you have to do it, and there's no other thing you want to do more. And that will be its own reward, because the rewards are, sometimes they come and sometimes they don't,
Thank you. That's very insightful and also very grounding in many ways. Can we talk briefly, and I'm also aware of time, about research and finding stories, and perhaps like how it is that you find stories? I know that, I think there was in the Himal, South Asian call for submission, I have it somewhere here in my notes, but it's something like, we're looking for submissions that we don't know. There's like a line that says, that surprises us, that we don't know of, like that not knowing, right? And then, so can we briefly talk about research in both fiction and nonfiction? And for you do both of that, right? And is that any different, or what are the differences? And also, I'm also drawing a little bit about because I teach at the Open Institute for Social Science, and a lot of our students are doing research, and I teach writing, so they do all this research, then how do we turn it into a public-facing piece that makes sense to a lay person who maybe isn't an expert in the field, right? So we do a lot of audience stuff. But one of the things that they always come back to me is like, research gardaheri say, am I being extractive? Am I being, like, that position of a writer, right? And a researcher is something that, like, the young folks are really concerned about, which I'm very, that's amazing, right? They're very aware. And I never know how to answer that question all the time. And in your piece, you were talking about when you wrote Mustang Bhot, you felt like you were going from the center, which is Kathmandu, to the periphery, which is Mustang, and that sort of your position as a writer and a researcher was also, you felt awkward, was I think the word that you used. And then in Suketu Mehta says, like, I'll just read this, like, so when you speak to people, when you say, tell me your story, you have to offer them something. What you offer them isn't money. Sometimes it's your friendship, but most of all, it's just your ear. We pay people hundreds of dollars an hour to listen to us, therapists, counselors. Here's a writer showing up, willing to spend years of his life listening to you for free. It becomes addictive. There's still people in Bombay who, when I go back, continue their narrative because they've become used to talking to me and me listening to them. So could we talk a little bit about research, but also like our position as writers and researchers? And I don't know if the question is what we owe, but yeah, maybe around that.
For me, researching fiction is not ethically as problematic as with nonfiction. It does end up being a power balance. and also extractive. So I remember, so the only straight journalism I've ever done in my life was during the war, and I Center for Investigative Journalism had a grant, so I went out and sort of met a lot of people who were doing human rights work to write about the violations that were taking place. And you know, when you met, and this, so to me, the question really should go to journalists, maybe, is like when you go and, you know, you can have an illusion that you're doing this in order to show the violence of the war so that it'll have an impact and it'll end and, you know, there'll be a good outcome. So you can say that to yourself, but when you're with the person you're interviewing whose life has been destroyed by the war and you're trying to get them to tell their story so that you write about it and then you go home, you know, it feels really difficult, and I never sort of kind of made peace with that, even though I understood that this is what journalists do regularly. But with fiction, it's lovely. You know, you go, you feel the mood of a place, and you give it to your, you know, fictional character. It's a different kind of research. But I was really intrigued by the sheer amount of research. Again, Parul Sehgal said when she writes one review, she not only reads the book she's reviewing, she reads as many books as possible of the author, as many reviews as she can find of those works, and, you know, as much about the context as possible, which is a huge amount of time, and, you know, is very responsible. But I just was floored by that. But I think maybe the two of you would be better placed to answer the research question.
I mean, on the ethics of it, yes, there's a lot of really fraught questions around journalism. The best you can do is come at it with empathy. That certainly doesn't solve all the problems. I mean, there's a terrific book called The Journalist and the Murderer for anyone who's interested, which is a great piece of journalism about the crazy compromises and ethical conundrums that you face as a journalist. A friend of mine, a very good reporter who has reported on a lot of really difficult things and faces this all the time. You go in, you take the story. Oftentimes, you know, you are there convinced that you are being empathetic and lending them an empathetic ear and that there is some value in that. And perhaps there is, but people are very often in, you know, when you're talking to people who are just going through some of the most difficult things you can imagine, or certainly the most difficult things in their lives, that's really not much consolation. They will speak to you on the expectation that it will make a material difference. And as a journalist, that's beyond your power. I mean, the machine has never been perfect. I think nowadays it's more broken than before. The machine, as we as a society have constructed it, is the journalist goes and tells you what's happened, and then there are other people that we as a society have empowered with the responsibility to go and do something about it. Frankly, those people don't give a damn oftentimes, right? And that's the problem. You can't solve that as a journalist, and you have to carry that with you, I think, oftentimes. I mean, he sometimes says that, you know, it's like being a carpenter. You can't get your material without chopping down a tree. It's a very crude way of putting it. He doesn't mean it in a crude way, but it's a rough metaphor, at least. It's part of doing it. And the question that I think we ask ourselves as journalists is, would it be better if we did nothing at all? And oftentimes, or most often for us, the answer is no. And that's the only answer we have.
In my journalistic writing, I do more storytelling than hard reporting. So there's not much research to do. I go and speak to people. Obviously, for a story, I'd speak to 20 people, but that's not really research, right? That's basically bringing out stories from people. And in column writing, there's a lot of research that has to be done, but it's more on the intellectual side. So I wouldn't claim that I do a lot of research in my writing.
I would say.
I just wanted to touch upon one last thing, and this was, I don't know how it'll come out, but In the interview with Anubhav Pal and Diksha Basu, they talk about how nowadays maybe like it's harder to get away with writing fiction, and because there's a lot of criticism. Like if you write a bad character, then you are that bad character. And so Anubhav says, the thing I'm finding terrifying is that when you write terrible characters, people think those are your values. And he says, I remember Gulshan Grover telling me that he had a difficult time getting an apartment in Bombay because people thought he was an a-hole. And he was like, no, I'm just an actor. I say lines. I don't molest people. I'm just a guy looking for a 2-bedroom flat. And the landlords would be like, I don't give houses to villains. So we're getting to a point where you cannot make a horrible character say horrible things. Thoughts?
There's a fair amount of pressure, particularly when I was younger, to make characters likable. It's a real thing, and particularly I think it may even be a little bit gendered, where if you're a woman and you're writing about characters who are not sympathetic characters, it's just not as desirable as writing, wonderfully empathetic characters. I do think, I'm of the firm belief that social media has made us stupider. I do feel like the dialogue, the discourse around literature has become very simplified and very sort of balkanized into factions. And where I'm living right now in Canada, we've had so many all-out fights, almost fist fights between, and it's very important issues. So whether it's the Palestine-Israel issue or other things, sexual harassment issues, many other institutional failures, but it has got to a point where nobody can say anything and everyone just kind of stays silent and has their view. So it's become very fraught because all of the debates are happening on social media instead of in person, in a lived space, a shared space. So yeah, I think it's a bit of a problem for young writers. One of the great things about getting older is that you just become more and more confident and there's less pressure on you. You can just say, no, this is what I want to do. And also, like, if I don't get published anymore, I also don't care. I've got a body of work behind me. It's like, okay, I'm going to take risks and try new things. And if nobody wants it, oh well, So you just become a little bit more confident in yourself. But I think for young writers, it's a lot of pressure on that.
Thank you so much for that. I think we can begin wrapping up. And on that note of young writers and pressure, I think for this year, the South Asia Speaks Fellowship is closed. The applications are closed, but then they're open next year. And Manju, you're going to be one of the mentors for this year, or you are a mentor for this year. And please apply if you're planning to, if you want to continue writing, if you want to be paired with a mentor. I think it's a great program, and maybe Dinesh can say a little bit about it, your time there as a mentee, and also we're hoping that we can end with a short reading from the work that you are working on or you worked on while you were mentee there too. And then we can, it's getting cold, so we can have chia and samosa and kapse.
Okay, so especially for the young writers here, you have already heard that South Asia Speaks is a really exciting fellowship program. It's actually one of the rare ones in South Asia. We don't have any such fellowship today in Nepal. So South Asia Speaks allows us an opportunity to learn from mentors. And Roman, you have been the mentor this year, right? To Shraddha? Yeah, I also had a chat with Shraddha. We also the good thing about this fellowship is that the mentees are encouraged to chat among themselves, to talk about their progresses and all. So it's really exciting. We continue to talk about our own struggles with writing, and so it has been a really exciting year for me So this was actually the second time I applied. The first time I applied, I didn't get it in 2022. So I applied the second time and I got it. So as of now, there have been 1,300 applicants and they have only selected 98 of them. So it's a really competitive program also. And it's really rewarding, especially for younger writers, and also because the requirement is that you shouldn't have published any major book form, right? Because it's for younger, newer writers. So for new writers, it's a really a wonderful program. So so my mentor was Sonia Faleiro, who is a renowned translator. So I was translating. So my application was for translation. So they match with writers with similar interests, and that's also a good thing about their program, because so Srinath is somebody whom I value. Actually, I've read his translations and I've really liked them. His translations have also been translated into Nepali, one of them Gachar Gochar. So their matching is also really good. And so I had a really good wavelength with Srinath, and it worked really well. We talked about my own work, but we also talked about the publishing industry at large, how the agenting thing works. I also got a bit of guidance from him on what kind of an agent, a literary agent to choose, things like that. A lot of practical advice also. Yeah, and that way it worked really well, and it's better for even like those writers in their 20s basically, because they have a lot of questions, right? I spent a lot of my time in India earlier when I was doing my university, so I did know a lot about how the Indian publishing industry works. So I more than questions, I had comments about the publishing industries, and that was not necessarily a good thing. So it's good for writers in their 20s to actually apply. And so yeah, I was working on this translation for a long time, but it wasn't going anywhere because of this problem that you feel that it's not good, it's not better yet, and you want to work more on it. So I was sitting on it for a long time, and so there during the fellowship, he did a lot of mentoring, and also he gave me this confidence that it's good to go. After a couple of readings, it's good to go. So I'm obviously doing a lot of readings and rewriting and all that. But I'll send it for publication soon. So I'll read a bit of it. I'm not great at reading. I haven't done much public reading yet, so excuse my fumbling and all. But yeah, here it is. So this is from Ular by Narendra Pandey. Narendra couldn't come today because he's apparently in some literary festival somewhere in Nepalganj, and he's coming today and going back to Pokhara again. So we have 9 literary festivals this month. So this is the festival season. So here also obviously we have this festival going on. So yeah, thank you to Nayandai also for trusting me. So this is from Ular, chapter number 4, where Prem Lalwa, as you know, many of you have read already. This is a very famous novella. Prem Lalwa's Tanga cart has been basically his horse has died because there has been a ular of his Tanga. And so he comes to Kathmandu because Shanti Raja, who was a local leader, has promised that he will find some compensation for him. And Prem Lalwa has heard that 20,000 rupees is nothing, like he can just give, because a minister can give this kind of petty cash to people like Prem Lalwa. So this is Prem Lalwa running from here to there in Kathmandu. So now he's basically chasing the minister. He has heard that the minister is at Baluatar. So he says, at Baluatar, there's another crowd. After his visits to Shanti Raja's Darbar and to Kathmandu, Prem Lalwa now understood the intimate relationship between politics and the crowd. Last night, He had slept in the common room of a hotel for 25 rupees. It was the most expensive sleep he had ever had. In fact, he didn't sleep at all. The hotel manager had given him the dirtiest mattress and quilt he had, but Prem Lalua found them to be clean for a person like himself. All night, he worried that the dirt from his body might soil the quilt and the mattress. Now, at the Prime Minister's residence in Baluatar, he was drowsy. At the hotel, Prem Lalua had met Nirakar Prasad, a fellow roommate. He found Nirakarji to be a decent man, as he treated him like he was one of his own. Prem Lalua was touched that in this foreign land, a man like Nirakarji was taking an interest in him. Nirakarji introduced himself as a writer, but Prem Lalua didn't understand what that meant. He thought it was some kind of a position, or a rank, or a clerk, or an officer. Nirakarji told him that he wrote stories and plays. Prem Lalua wondered if Nirakarji wrote bond agreements and resignation letters. You understand, I'll write a story about you, Nirakarji said, preparing a thematic outline in his mind. Although he didn't know what was going on, Prem Lalua told Nirakarji all his problems. He told Nirakarji about himself, about Kalua, about Bhauji, and about Nanakau. He hadn't really spoken to anyone the past few days, so now he spoke his heart out to Nirakarji. He didn't say a word about Draupadi though. He wanted to keep her within his heart. He didn't want to make her public. You understand? We're writers. We're touched by the pain and sorrow of others, Nirakarji said. No, Prem Lalua still didn't get what Nirakarji was talking about, but he did understand that Nirakarji had had a few drinks in him. Prem Lalua was still greatly impressed with Nirakarji, who seemed like a man who could be trusted with one's life story. So he told him all of his problems, his ramshackle house, his tanga, the death of his Basanti, the rally, the curfew, the riot, the election, the loss of Rajendra Raj Sharma, the victory of Santi Raja, everything that had anything to do with his pain. Do you have 10 rupees? Nirakarji asked. Prem Lalua readily gave him 10 rupees. Nirakarji will certainly return it in the morning, he thought. Nirakarji stepped out of the hotel and returned in a while, stumbling a little more. You have a powerful story, Prem Lalua, Nirakarji said. I'll help you out, he promised, asking for another 20 rupees. Prem Lalua gave it to him. Nirakarji went out again. He returned again, stumbling even more. You have a very powerful story, Prem Lal. I'll help you meet the minister, Nirakarji assured him, adding, do you have 50 rupees? Prem Lalua gave it to him. Nirakarji took it from him. He stepped out, returned again, out of control and out of composure. He fell onto his bed and almost unconsciously said, you have a powerful story. In the morning, Nirakarji wasn't around. Prem Lalua became anxious. He searched frantically for Nirakarji. In fact, he wasn't searching for Nirakarji. But he was searching for the 80 rupees Nirakarji owed him. Alas, his 80 rupees wasn't to be found. Thus, he came to Baluatar, vehemently convincing himself that whatever had gone, had gone. He found himself jostling in and out of various crowds and groups. In some, he heard talk of raising someone up. In others, he heard talk of dragging someone down. Baluatar was a labyrinth, and he found himself lost for a long time. But he still couldn't find his minister. The minister hadn't come to Baluatar at all. He learned from somebody in the crowd that the minister was actually at the party office, and now the hunt for the party office. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Manju, for being here. Roman and Dinesh, thank you so much for your time and for sharing the stage. Thank you to all of you for sitting so patiently in the cold. There's tea, there's snacks, there's kapse to be had. Please grab a book, grab 2 books, grab a couple books. They're on sale. I think maybe you guys, or I hope you can sign. I think some people might want that. Yeah. Get her to sign. Yeah.
Just want to say one thing to any young writers out there. At Himal, we do an annual fiction fest where we're on the hunt for the next generation, really. Last year we did translations. Like you said, that was super exciting. This year, there's I think a renaissance starting up in science fiction in South Asia. And again, crossing those lines, right? I think that some time ago, South Asians were supposed to write about tigers and monsoons and mangoes, right? Not about science fiction, but again, writers make a mess of these things in a wonderful way. So we have a submission deadline until the 1st of April. So any of you who would like to try your hand at that, if you've got an idea or a book, a short story that has anything to do with science fiction, speculative fiction, sitting on your laptops, please send it in. And we love to work with young writers. We love to edit young writers as well and to do this in a very collaborative way. So just wanted to say that. And I'm a little bit shy about plugging these things, but I think this is maybe the right place to do it, just because this is a community of readers and writers as well. And Himal South Asian, the magazine, we're trying to foster that and build that. And we have a newsletter and a podcast where we're trying to really get this conversation going and sharing. We've got bookmarks at the table. I hope you will all buy books and grab those bookmarks, or just grab those bookmarks also, that's fine. And join us, join the conversation, sign up to our newsletter. And yeah, thank you so much, Muna.
One second. The application for South Asia Speaks opens in September this year. So all of you younger writers, I encourage you to write. And if there's any way I can help you, I'm always there to help you with the applications and all.